Hi, I'm James Dean Vogel of the Bioprocess Institute, and this is Between Two Ferals. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, Harold Mantius. Harold is a graduate of University of Rhode Island as a chemical engineer and has worked for most of his career for Ocean Spray Cranberries. Before that, he was with Best Foods and Ciba-Geigy. So let's welcome Harold Mantius. So I know you had to go a far way to get here today.
Not too far.
Yeah, you're on the other side of North Kingstown here, right in town. So, that's good. Well, we're glad you could come here and visit with us. And we have these Between Two Ferals where we talk to people in the industry, chemical engineers, folks, just to kind of get an idea of some of the things going on in the industry and also to give advice to some of the young people coming into the industry. And you have a wealth of experience that I think you could share with us and hopefully give them some guidance to that. One thing is, maybe let's start with, how did you get into chemical engineering? What attracted you to chemical engineering first that made you choose that as a major?
Well, I was just interested in problem solving. And actually, you know, I had kind of two interests when I went to college. It was interest in engineering or interest in history. And I chose engineering because I couldn't see any future in history.
Well, that's good, and you saw a lot of future in engineering, obviously. You had a lengthy career there. So you started with Ciba-Geigy. What did you do there when you got out of school?
Well, you know, it's funny. My whole career has been in process development, more or less. Mm-hmm. And I started in Ciba-Geigy working in the field of process research and development, process development. And I would take projects that were handed to me by people to scale up a procedure that a chemist had developed for making a pesticide or a herbicide or what have you. Mm-hmm. And we would scale it from a lab scale up to a pilot scale, and from a pilot scale up to an industrial scale. And it was interesting work because a lot of times, you know, chemists would describe something on their benchtop like mild agitation being taking a test tube and shaking it with their hands, and of course to an engineer that's not mild agitation.
Right.
So you would have to, you know, reinterpret what they said and try to make sense of it, and then accordingly scale it up and end up with a process that would work industrially.
Nice. Now, I know when you were with Best Foods, you worked on a continuous process, right? What was that making, that continuous process?
Mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise.
Yes.
So a lot of people in chemical engineering today, you know, kind of look at food engineering as kind of, well, that's a little passé, it's a little, let's say, less interesting, less sexy, less that.
Right.
But you did a pretty exciting thing with the mayonnaise. Tell me a little bit about how you had that. That was a continuous process,
That was
right?
a continuous process. And one of my fields of interest, and if I might say so myself, expertise at that time was process control. And of course, when you get into continuous processing, process control is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. So with mayonnaise, we needed to take a four ingredient stream system, blend those four ingredient streams in a controlled fashion, because mayonnaise has a standard of identity. Every jar has to meet that standard of identity. So we had to accurately blend those streams. Then you have to mill those streams. They call it milling. It's basically shearing the liquid streams so that you end up with a tight emulsion, because mayonnaise is an emulsion. It's basically an oil and egg emulsion. And you want it to end up with a certain rheology that is pleasing. Okay, in terms
of that basic
mouthfeel,
and also that it sets up in the jar nicely.
That's
wide
exactly
mouth
right.
on the Hellmann's mayonnaise.
That's exactly right. And it's a dynamic system because it changes over time. Even after you put it in the jar, it's changing over time. So what I did working for this fella that I was very fortunate to work for we modeled the system dynamically so that we could determine, based upon the line parameters of the packaging line, the process parameters that were linked to those line parameters, we could model the system so that we could determine what mayonnaise would be like when the customer saw it. Now, it was a very complex, mayonnaise is a very complex rheological system. Not only is it oil and egg, but you also inject nitrogen into it to give it a certain density. So it's oil and nitrogen in an egg emulsion. So it's very easy to break. That emulsion is very easy to break. So you need to do things under very controlled circumstances.
One of your major accomplishments in your career, and you have quite a few patents related to this, is sweet and dried cranberries.
Right.
Basically the process used to make craisins.
Right.
Right. And so you became a research fellow at Ocean Spray, and kind of this whole process and the way it was really something you were kind of working more for, helping them to optimize and get some things going, and then as it turned out, Craisins became a wildly successful product, right?
That is correct, yes. When I was hired at Ocean Spray, I was once again hired in the field of process development and process optimization. And I was put on a project to utilize a countercurrent extractor to more or less get more juice out of the fruit. And the fellow that hired me had this idea that he would use this countercurrent extractor as a means of continuous depectinization. One of the ways of making cranberry concentrate is to add enzyme to liquefy the fruit, and basically it collapses the structure of the fruit and releases the juice. It's a very efficient process, and it generally is a high yield process. And so his concept was we could use the countercurrent extractor as a better contactor for the enzyme and reduce our enzyme costs substantially. He was looking at, for one of our plants, we were spending in excess of $1 million a year, and he was looking for savings of up to $500,000 a year.
Wow.
I looked at it simplistically and I said, well, I'm just going to eliminate all the enzymes. Why should I eliminate half the enzymes? I'm going to eliminate all the enzymes. So I started doing my work, just basically adding water to the high end of the unit. Let me describe this unit first of all. It's an incline trough with a screw in it that reciprocates. So basically you end sliced fruit at the bottom of the unit, the screw moves the fruit up the unit, and then you add water at the high end of the unit, and by gravity the water passes through the fruit and extracts the juice osmotically. And also you got this reciprocating motion that acts as a gentle press. So you got those two mechanisms that are removing the juice from the fruit.
At the end, if I remember correctly, the fruit actually is lifted out of the liquid,
that is
right?
correct.
And so then it dries and it drips out before it's removed from the trough.
That is exactly right.
Okay.
That is exactly right. So when I started out doing this process, we started out with very low yields because you got to start somewhere. So what I did is once with the low yields, I said, let me make some modifications. I made a physical modification to the system that lifted my yield of the juice up to a point that was moderately good. Basically, I lifted it from about 60 odd percent up to about 80 odd percent.
Wow, that's pretty good.
And I was basically able with water to get it up to a 96% extraction efficiency in the unit. And so I was able to position it at that time is that we were able to get comparable yields with this unit that without any enzyme use.
Wow, so you saved that $1 million that your old boss was looking for.
Yeah, saved the $1 million the old boss was looking for. But and actually the yield was actually higher than 96%. If you think about it, if you designed a system at that time, you would take the extracted fruit and press it, and you would get a residual yield from that would augment the 96% you were getting in the trough.
And just to be clear, when you started this, the product was the juice.
Just the juice.
You were
That's
looking to get juice through a cranberry cocktail and so on.
Right. And so one of the fellas that was in my group was a fellow named Pete Peterson, and he had been working on the sweet and dried cranberry process at one of our co-packers. And this process was basically to take cranberries and to soak it in an infusion syrup to sweeten it. But you can't just soak it in infusion syrup to sweeten it. You also need a mechanism to remove a certain percentage of acid, because cranberries are so acidic that they're unpalatable unless you use unless you remove a high fraction of the acid. So what the process did was, not only did it sweeten the cranberries, but it also extracted acid, and they were extracting the acid in the form of spent syrup that was then accumulating in their storage warehouses like a tidal wave of syrup was building up in their storage.
So they had tanks filled with this syrup and acid, sugar and acid.
Sugar and acid. It was an unsustainable process, but you know, Ocean Spray wanted to get into this sweet and dry cranberry business. So I was in discussions with this fella, Pete Peterson, and I said to him, and he looked at my process, and we both had this eureka moment where the fruit coming out of my extractor, when you just use water, was structurally intact. And that's the magic of cranberries, is cranberries have this wonderful structure where if you don't use enzymes and you just use water, the fruit will be extracted and still be structurally intact. So we knew we had a vehicle for making sweet and dried cranberries without the acid problem. So what we did then was, we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll design a process that extracts the juice, takes the extracted fruit, infuses it, and controls the formulation. And this way we can make any product. And one of the first products we made to demonstrate this point was a product we called Grapelets, which was to take 100% white grape concentrate and infuse the extracted fruit. So we got 100% juice yield, or 96+% juice yield, and we produced an entirely new product.
Cranberries in grape juice.
Yeah, so it was 100% fruit.
Yep.
So it demonstrated the concept. Of course, you could also produce the Craisin process, you know, Craisin being the retail brand for Ocean Spray, whereby you add the requisite amount of cranberry acid back to give you the perfect acid content of the finished product. This way you don't generate any spent syrup. So this was really a unique process. So we went forward and we patented that process, and it proved to be very beneficial. As a matter of fact, when we set up our first industrial plant, which was in Wisconsin, a little town called Tomah, Wisconsin, people would say to me, well, how much spent syrup are you going to generate? And I'd say, none. We're not going to generate any. As a matter of fact, you can ship us the spent syrup that's in the storehouse, and we'll use that as a source of the cranberry solid. So we had this synergistic benefit between the two processes, right? So, you know, it was an amazing journey for me in terms of process development up front, patenting, which I was unfamiliar with till I got at Ocean Spray, and I became quite good at it by the time I left in terms of, you know, patenting processes. And also scaling up the pilot process once again to the commercial process. Once we had the commercial process set up, going through all the process control, making the process better, process optimization. The plant we designed, to give you an example of that, the plant we designed in Tomah was designed originally for 8 million pounds of product per year. And then we doubled that process to 16 million pounds a year by just basically replicating it on site.
So you had parallel paths?
Parallel paths.
Yep.
But through process optimization, we took that process from 16 million pounds a year up to something like 60 odd million pounds a year.
Wow.
And so it just goes to show you that, you know, using, you know, process control, systematic approach, good engineering principles, this is what you can bring to the table, and in the food industry anyway. So.
Well, and I think that's great advice for a young chemical engineer, or any engineer really, coming into things. I think one of the other things that's interesting, I know we talked about, is you're dealing with a natural product.
Right.
So it's not the same everywhere. You installed this process in South America, and then obviously here in Massachusetts there's the process. So how did it adapt to dealing with the different fruit? Because cranberries aren't the same wherever they're grown, or maybe season to season they're different.
Right. Well, you know, that's an excellent point, and that is that when we designed this process, one of the key issues that we had to face is to make it robust enough to handle the natural variation of the fruit in whatever area we put it in. So it's not, you don't have a perfect fruit stream coming in. You don't have the luxury of having a perfect stream.
Like your chemical plant at Ciba-Geigy, you would buy X chemical that had a standard of identity, and
it would have a tight spec. Here you're dealing with fruit of varying size, of varying maturity, of varying color, and you're trying to end up with a finished product that's as uniform as possible. And if you talk about going from region to region, it changes one region to the next. Like the fruit in Massachusetts at the time, and still is, much smaller in general than the fruit in Wisconsin. So you have to adjust your process. You need a process that's robust enough and adjustable enough so that you can handle that variation. Yeah, so we went down in Chile, and that was an interesting process too, because the fruit down there was really different than the fruit up here in the north. And
wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's glad that I'm glad to see that you were able to get the process in there.
Yeah.
So, a young chemical engineer, a young engineer coming out today, what advice would you give him or her right now? What are some of the things that you saw in your career that were keys to your success, or what you would recommend to them?
Well, you know, I'm different than a lot of people in that regard. I stress a lot the fundamental principles. I think it's important to understand the fundamental principles and not so much the mechanics. The mechanics are good. You need to know how to do things, obviously, but you need to have an understanding. And I think this is key when it comes to such issues as factorial design, for instance. There's a lot of people that use your black belt techniques of, factorial design.
And statistics and
statistics.
To
but you know,
vector.
They don't understand the limitations of those techniques. They're too enamored of the mechanics of it. If you're not on target, you can't fine-tune a process. You have to be able to move your process to a target before you fine-tune it. If you try to fine-tune it and you're too far away, it's a nightmare. So before you can use factorial design, you really need a sound appreciation for the process per se. The other thing is, the other limitation in factorial design is, it's based on the assumption of steady state, that the data you're getting means that, especially in a continuous process, is that everything is operating under steady state. Otherwise, the noise in the signal is so great that you just can't disentangle it. So I know when I did my work at Best Foods under the tutelage of this fella that hired me, it was very important that when we were doing our work with mayonnaise and developing these highly accurate models, that we made sure that the process was at steady state for gathering all our process information. And that allowed us to predict.
Who's more responsible for the Super Bowl victories of the Patriots? Is it Tom Brady or Bill Belichick?
I think they're both responsible.
We obviously, I know you and I had a wager about this, and we saw what happened last year, right? And a certain individual was able to win the Super Bowl, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And so what's your opinion of that?
Yeah, well, no, I think they're both, outstanding individuals. There's no doubt about that. I'm a big Brady fan, but, I have a lot of respect for Bill Belichick.
Well, and the Patriots are I think, this year coming into stride right now.
Yeah, yes, they are.
So we're looking good there.
Yes,
all right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Harold. It's been a joy to have you here. I appreciate you coming by the Bioprocess Institute.
Yeah.
Thank you.